The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, in what's commonly known as Victoria, BC, Canada. Today's episode is especially dedicated to all the parents out there of tweens and teens who are exploring their gender identity. Paria Hassouri is a pediatrician, mother of three, and writer whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, and the Huffington Post. She and her family live in LA, where she practices pediatrics at Cedars Sinai Medical Center. And she's the author of the book Found in Transition, A Mother's Evolution During Her Child's Gender Change, a very frank, sometimes painfully honest account of parenting a transgender teen. Paria chronicles what amounts to a dual transition. As her child transitions from male to female, she navigates through anger, denial, and grief to eventually arrive at acceptance. Blindsided by her child's gender identity, Paria is also forced to examine how she still carries insecurities from her past of growing up as an Iranian-American immigrant in a predominantly white neighborhood. As the parent of a trans teen myself, whose child also transitioned in 2017, I could relate to some parts of Paria's experience for sure. Some parts were actually pretty hard to read, and I maybe even felt a bit uncomfortable with some of her innermost thoughts at times, but I always really appreciated her naming her truth. I really do think that as parents, we need to have honest and very compassionate conversations amongst ourselves about how our kids' gender journeys do impact us. And they do intersect with our emotions, mental health, our identities, and politics. I'm not at all saying, I'm not even implying that our experience needs to be centered or decisive. I don't know, maybe even not that influential in all cases, but I am saying that our experience as parents does need to be held with care too. And in some parallel process, one that's probably slower and longer than our kids might want, we do need to feel seen and heard, at least by our peers, if not by our kids. I'm super impressed with Paria for writing such a brave book, and it was an honor to hear more about her process and personal evolution, personally and professionally, on her journey parenting a trans teen. So Paria, what identities do you lead with?
I think I've always led with mother. I have a lot of identities, but I think 90% or 99% of who I am is probably mother. And then I guess after that, it's hard to say, but wife, daughter, pediatrician, writer, Iranian-American woman, advocate, friend.
That's great. In your book, you describe in raw detail the thoughts and emotions you had as your child came out to you as trans and revealed her true self to you. Can you start by telling us about that phone call that you received from the vice principal? So, setting the scene, you and your husband are on vacation and your three kids are back home with your parents. What was that phone call about? What was it like?
Yeah, so my husband and I hadn't taken a vacation alone without the children in a long time. And we were in Thailand on a yoga retreat, and it was around 5 a.m. And when my phone rang, my heart sank. I just had a feeling that it wasn't something good. And it was the vice principal of Ava's school calling to let us know that they'd had to call my parents who were staying with the kids to come and pick her up because she had told one of her teachers that she was self-harming, and that she was self-harming because she felt that she was not a boy and that she was a girl, and she didn't know how to tell us. It was the last thing on earth I expected to hear. I think I would have been less shocked by a phone call saying, oh, one of your kids was struck down by lightning than your kid says they're trans, because I had never, ever suspected that my child may have any sort of gender issue. And I think, when your child is 13, you think their gender. So, it was a lot of, it was really hard to be across the world and hear that your child is hurting herself. And I wasn't upset about the trans thing, because I just thought, okay, the trans thing is not real, so that's not the issue. I'm just heartbroken that my kid is so lost, confused, something's going on, that they are resorting to like self-harm. And so it was really the self-harm that was, and she was doing some cutting, but it was the self-harm that was so like shocking and scary for me. And the trans thing was just like, well, that's not actually what's going on, but I'll figure out what's actually going on when I get back.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'd just like to amplify what you've said about how shocking it was. My listeners know that I have a trans son who's now 17, and I had a sort of similar experience when they were 13, already had understood them to understand themselves as bisexual or lesbian, curious, not sure. And that had been for about a year. And so this idea that something comes out of the blue that you don't know about your child and it's very shocking and it should be so obvious this is very common. This is, my situation was we were shopping for an outfit for my son to wear to his grandparents, his Italian older grandparents, for Easter, like second only to Christmas for important Catholic holidays where you would dress up nicely. And we were at the mall for like 3 hours going from store to store. And he hated every single thing he was trying on. And he's in this young woman's store, Claire's or whatever it was, some fast fashion store in the dressing room. We're both getting frustrated because we hate capitalism and shopping. And he's texting me going, I hate this. I'm having a meltdown. I can't do this. I'm like, just pick a goddamn shirt or dress. Yeah. And he says, but I'm a boy. And I was just like, whatever, buy a goddamn dress. Like I just didn't even believe, right? Like I was like, something's going on. Something's upsetting. But that is not the thing that I even could quite grok. I couldn't quite grasp it at that time and something was up clearly, but it never crossed my mind that I was missing this like very large issue. So I just want to share that story to help parents who are either going through this experience right now, who felt that they had a pretty strongly attached or close relationship, and then like are in the shock phase, that this is like super common. This is not unusual to have a close relationship, or even if it had difficulties, but think your kid pretty well, not be sort of absent, very present in their life, and miss this whole big swath.
Right.
So I just want to share that. So the whole book is you sharing that for the better part of the year, this was really difficult for you.
Yes.
There are times I was a little shocked. I was like, wow, Paria, this is so deeply honest. But staying kind of connected with where you are now, what would your older, wiser self now say if she was standing beside you at that phone call, coaching you through it?
Yeah.
Those moments, what would you say to your younger self?
I think there's a lot I would say to my younger self. One of the main things would be just stop and listen rather than reacting, because I just started reacting and my mind started racing. Like, what am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? How am I going to get out of this, situation, rather than stopping and listening. So I would definitely say that. I would, tell myself everything is going to be more than okay beyond what you can possibly, imagine, because, the possibility that this might even be true comes with so much fear for what your child's future is going to be.
Yeah.
And, so if I could just, and I just couldn't picture that I would ever, see this person as my daughter, and was so hard for me to think that, she could like thrive and have a full life as, the beautiful young woman that she is now. So, I would say listen, you know, everything's going to be okay. And, really don't underestimate your own capacity to evolve, along with your child. I mean, no other experience I've ever had has changed me this much. I can't imagine that I will have another experience that will change me this much in the future. But now I know, anything really, anything is possible. And it's just, it's amazing what your mind and heart can not just adapt to, but really just grow to like love and be enriched, by. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but
beautiful.
I think primary would be just stop and listen. Just stop and listen. Yeah.
So that's kind of the emotional part and the mother in you.
Right.
It's interesting how even as a pediatrician, you share quite a bit in the book about like they never taught this in school,
Right.
And obviously there have been great advances in, the last number of years. Mm-hmm. What are some of the myths that you as a pediatrician had actually internalized that you now professionally realize were wrong? Are there some things that, you had accepted and maybe some of the things that your child wanted you dismissed out of hand because you felt you had professional insight, some kind of epistemic privilege where you knew better? Where were you wrong?
Yeah, as pediatricians, we, back when I was training, we were taught that kids declare their gender by 3 or 4. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's really the biggest myth. Oh, if you don't just wake up and be trans when you're 13 years old, so if you did, if when you were 3, 4, 5 years old, you didn't, resist the gender that was imposed on you, you couldn't possibly be, trans. I think that's sort of, really the biggest myth. And, so AVA came out in 2017, and the American Academy of Pediatrics put out their first policy on supporting trans youth in September of 2018, like about 15 months after she came out. There really was nothing. Fortunately, since 2018, slowly we're getting more and more information. But, even now, as physicians, we're all required to do like a certain amount of continuing medical education credits every year to maintain our license. But there's nothing to, nothing dictates what you need to do those credits, in. So if this doesn't end up being an area you're interested in, you don't learn anything about it, and so I think, we still have a long way to go in terms of just, educating all primary care physicians on how gender, presents, what the needs of this, community is. But I think really the biggest myth that we learned was kids declare their, by 3 years old, a kid can tell you if they're a boy or a girl. And that's no, a kid at 3 years old, a kid can tell you what their parent has told them they are.
Exactly. Yeah. It was fascinating to read those parts of your book because even I, as a layperson, had internalized that. I don't know where I got that from, but just this subconscious belief that like, well, I would have seen something. Although now in retrospect, it's like, no, there's something about puberty that it becomes very triggering.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, now it's like, oh, the obviousness in retrospect that
Right.
couldn't possibly have been right ever,
Right.
seems, so apparent. But I had internalized that too. So it was very comforting to read those kind of offhand statements you were making, like, oh, you can't do, these kinds of treatments now, it's too late, or what have you. It's like, oh,
Right.
that's very fascinating. So you were very quick to connect Ava with some resources. You had that sense of, okay, therapy, here we go. And a lot of the book takes place, or at least a lot of what really stood out to me were the scenes where you and Ava are in the car, either driving to or from some therapy or family support service appointment.
Mm-hmm.
And you, at some point, it suggested to you, here, Mom, maybe you should go get some therapy. This is a hard experience for you. And you spend a lot of the book writing and sharing your journals. And I think you even say in that scene, like, running is my therapy.
Right.
And it's true, when you were in private, in the car, running, there would be these breakdowns, etc. But I was kind of stumped, like, why isn't she getting therapy? Like, wouldn't it be so nice to have more support at this time? And
Right.
it never kind of gets resolved. And I'm wondering, and even couples therapy wasn't brought up. I was like, God, I know how hard this has been on we had couples therapy, individual therapy, family therapy with the ex. I don't know how she's doing it.
Right.
Is it still true for you that therapy for yourself was kind of a non-starter?
Well, I think I definitely should have gone to therapy. I felt like therapy I think there were a couple of factors. Therapy would be another thing on my list of things to fit in, and I felt like I don't have the time to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
I think certainly initially therapy would have been like an admission that maybe my kid is trans and I need to deal with it, versus, when I'm in the phase of thinking, she's not trans. So I just need to get therapy for her so that she realizes she's not, so that the therapist can tell her, hey, you're not trans, and we can, move on.
Yeah.
But interestingly, I think it was really just like, it's, it's so hard to find therapists. And I was just doing too many things to add that to my list. What happened is when my older son, my firstborn, went to college, and this was after I had actually already turned in the draft of my book, and I had a publisher, and everything was said and done. And my older son went to college, my firstborn, and I had a breakdown essentially, and I ended up in a therapist's office, and and then worked with a therapist for a few months, and finally, I told, and I couldn't figure out why I was having such a hard time with my oldest going to college. And that landed me in a therapist's office versus, having a child transition didn't. And then one day I said to the therapist, I said, you know what? I feel like I've lost two sons. And once I said that, which was something I hadn't verbalized really to anyone, I was actually able to move on, and I did a few months of therapy. And of course, now I don't feel like I've lost any children, but I did finally land in a therapist's office. So I should have gone earlier.
That's so touching to hear. I feel like I've lost two sons, and that's so valid. That's so valid, even though you're like happy and you love them and you wouldn't want them any other way, and you're, all that stuff. It's still true as a mother. Like I was saying to my own son, the adolescent brain is developing so rapidly in those 10 years, like 14 to 24. So what feels like forever to you is actually like 4 months. So, and whereas my adult brain is holding all this history. And so this actually feels like a nanosecond, And so it does take a little while to catch up to the moment. And it takes a while for our spirit to catch up and be like, oh, wow, I've just gone through a massive personal revolution.
Right.
And so that's very touching to hear that ended up for you. I also want to say it is so hard to find therapists, no matter who you are, but particularly the more marginalized your identity is. Like, how would you find a therapist who could hold the positions that you hold as not only the parent of a trans daughter, but as a first generation Iranian immigrant with, who is also a professional with profile and is visible as an author. And like, these are all very difficult things. So I want to just share that so that folks who are looking for their therapist, if it's not working out, it's like dating. You kind of like, you have to go through them. We do a thing where it's like, or we have done a thing looking for good therapists where it's like, okay, we'll choose 5 and we start at the top. Yeah. But we assume we may have to date them all. But, we give each one some time.
Right.
Because it's really hard to find somebody that you can have rapport with. I'm glad that you had that. Has that changed the dynamic in your family, maybe for your kids or even for your husband around, the maybe any stigma that there might have been?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I had stigma around therapy. I'm definitely have always been very open about it and thought it's great. And that that everybody should, have a therapist. So, I think it was just, time and, all the things. And there was so much to do and so many appointments. And it was just an overwhelming time.
You were just really in it.
I failed to see that that it would be really, really beneficial to take some other things off my list and add therapy, to my list.
Right. That's good advice. I could really relate to the grief that you felt at times, and the scenes of crying alone in the car. And there are so many losses on so many levels. And I was thinking in preparing for this interview that it's such a tricky place to be in when you've had a child, because it isn't like you just attended some birth. Like you were literally a portal for a human being to enter this whole new world. And as the birthing parent, it happens to us and through us. And we have, of course, our experience of it that is valid. It's very difficult to suddenly have that totally re-scripted. And for me, I was thinking maybe the name change pain that you talked about, which I definitely felt. I felt the name change so deeply. And maybe that's just like part of this self-aggrandizing power trip that parents go on with children, but also their birthing and the blessing of their naming and the container we create for them with their name is not a trifling thing. It's very focusing, and being a birthing parent absorbs a tremendous amount of our being. So when it came to your child's name, it seemed like your whole family had strong feelings about it, even including your older son. Can you share why the name change was so significant for you and your partner and your family?
Yeah, I think the name change, in many ways, there were points where the name change, letting go of that old name was harder than letting go of the old gender. In my, culture in particular, names all have, usually have a meaning and a significance to them. And, I had sort of struggled most of my life with this, like holding on to my Iranian identity at the same time as, being, trying to be say that I am an American, just like everybody else. And, had always tried to kind of figured out this balance of what felt appropriate, for my family, and, just felt very strongly about all 3 of my kids having Iranian names. And so, My other two kids are Arman and Shada. And Ava initially wanted the name Lucy. And I just felt like that name didn't fit into our family. And so having her, which Lucy is a lovely name, but it just doesn't have any significance in Iranian culture. And so it felt like now not only are you changing, going by a different gender, but you're also almost leaving our culture, leaving our family by going through a name, this name that's so, foreign. And, the name Ava, we have it in our culture. We pronounce it Ava, and sometimes I pronounce her name Ava, but she generally goes by Ava. And my older son Arman, his name means like hopes and aspirations, and Shada means passions, and Ava in Iranian means like a beautiful, strong, resounding voice, which is actually very appropriate for her, both as as a trans person who's standing up for who she is, and also because she has a beautiful singing voice and she sings. So names have a lot of significance for me. And so as her parents, not getting to play a role in choosing the name was really difficult for me to accept. So, we had that battle, and for a while I felt like, maybe we pushed too hard. Maybe we should have let her go by the name Lucy. But fortunately, in the last couple of years, she's actually said that she's glad we that we sort of forced the issue, and that we did go with Ava, and that she really does like it, and she does feel like it does fit her better than Lucy. So, but I'm still not 100% sure we did the right thing. Not every parent decides to be that forceful in with their child and the name they choose, but it did have a lot of significance. And even my son was like, yeah, you guys should choose the name. You're still the parents, and yeah. But I think it was really the cultural aspect of it that was really, really important to me, that it felt like a name that still aligned with our cultural identity.
That it really was one of the most sort of uplifting parts of the story for me, that I was like, oh, this is so good, that like even Ava, there's something in her that seems to still want to belong in her family and the culture. And so, yeah, I thought that line, it was so memorable in the book when Armin says, "You're still the parents." I could just like almost hear him saying it. And also, your husband was like, around the name, that seemed to be the one that triggered the most emotion in the men in your family. And I was like, oh, they really care about this. This is like really important and part of belonging. And I was so happy that, even as a young person going through so many changes where everything kind of feels up for grabs in a way, like all the things that you thought were true, maybe not true, and you're kind of exploratory and curious. I was glad that even with all of that happening, Ava kind of settled into something resonant on so many levels. So I'm so happy that she's still happy with it.
Yes.
So growing up as a first generation Iranian-American, your anxieties around belonging were, sometimes, maybe often, triggered as Ava's transition became more public. But I found some of the sweetest moments in your story were the expressions of unconditional love from your family. There, granted, of course, there were difficulties with, holidays. God, I know that experience of what are they going to wear to Easter dinner or whatever, and with your mother, etc. But it brought back your own experience of feeling unconditionally loved by your auntie in Iran as you were a child. And then there's this beautiful scene with longtime family friends of your parents that you include, that I'd love for you to share. And also I'd love for you to say more about what surprised you about the elders around you, and what did you learn about how to deal with change from the elders in your life?
Yeah, I was really scared to tell my mom. I thought that my mom was going to somehow blame this on me, like as if I'd caused this by being too busy, um, I don't know, not parenting, right, not giving her the attention she needed. So she would be resorting to this to get my attention. And also that my mom just wouldn't understand it at all. And so I was so afraid to tell her. And when I told her, I mean, right away, and I don't even know if she definitely understood it or not, but right away she said, everything's going to be okay. Everything. I think she could probably feel the pain in my voice when I told her. And so, her immediate instinct was, yeah, everything's going to be okay. And, don't stress, don't worry. We're going to figure this out. We're going to get through this. And then my father spent the next several days like researching and reading everything he could read about, trans people, and, called back and said, here's the situation. And we just have to, support the kid, and take it day by day. And I was just really, really surprised. And I kept trying to explain to my mom, this isn't about like being gay, mom. This is like this is gender, because I was like, maybe she doesn't understand what I'm trying to tell her because she seems accepting, and I'm not expecting that. And so I was, and she was fine. And I mean, I had no question that my siblings would be supportive. And, my parents' friends all like, I was worried about what were my parents' friends, going to say, and was that going to be uncomfortable for my parents? And, my dad's oldest friend from childhood who, at that time is, in his early 70s. Now he's in his late 70s, sent a bouquet of flowers, with a card saying to Ava saying, Ava, we love and support you. And we're so proud of you. And as soon as they heard, and it was just, people really rallied. And that was just really, really great. And so I just, I talk to other parents going through this all the time who are so scared to tell their family members. And I just say, actually just give people a chance because they might surprise you. We make these assumptions, but people will surprise you. I do, at that time I think I didn't really include too much in the book about my husband's family's reaction. His siblings were super supportive right from the start. His parents had a harder time, and I do mention his. My husband's mom sent me this article that I didn't like, but they came. So we had a little time with them where we just kind of said, you. Either you're on board or you're not on board. And, they took a little time and then they got on board, and really made sure that we protected her from anybody who wasn't going to be, a positive person in her life. So, but yeah, I tell people all the time, actually give people a chance, your true friends and family, they're going to be there for you. And, when it's, whether it's religion or culture, when they see it happening in their own loved one, it just changes, it changes everything, and some people aren't accepting. And so you just say, okay, take some time. And if you have questions, come back with questions, but until you're going to accept this, you're not in our,
Mm-hmm.
going to be in communication with us.
Yeah, we're not in community. Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they'll come around.
Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you brought up that it wasn't always easy. It's not, your story is not unique, but it's also not everybody's story where people come around within a year or what have you, right? Also, we didn't talk very much, and I don't want to dwell on it, but it had been a long, difficult road with Ava in terms of her mood and,
Mhm.
sensitivities and different things from quite a young age.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that came up for me is I think it's important to name that class privilege does play a pretty significant role in a parent's ability to find and afford services to support their trans kids. What are your thoughts on how we, as parents of, I would call it significant privilege. I'm not college educated. I'm not a doctor. I don't live in Beverly Hills, but I would still consider myself to be somebody who has access to education.
Mhm.
I live in a large enough town that there are a few supportive therapists who take an intersectional approach. However, I I I did not have the great experience that you had, for instance, with transforming families and like the services for families that are in
Yeah.
LA. That happy scene was like not what I was experiencing in the
Mhm.
parents of trans kids group, where the kids were experiencing significant mental and emotional challenges,
Mhm.
much not even to do with gender dysphoria or, society's view of their gender, but just pre-existing for so many reasons.
Yeah.
And they were still struggling before, during, after transit. It was
Yeah.
just how difficult it is to get
Yeah.
services. So what do you think, what are your thoughts on some of the levers we could apply pressure to, or where we should put resources to affect
Yeah.
change to make trans aware and inclusive care more accessible and the norm?
Yeah. Yeah. I was definitely aware that I do have tremendous privilege. I think, for me, I mean, a lot of these treatments are very, very costly. Um, you know, we have spent a lot of money on hair removal that we've had to pay for, out of pocket. When we couldn't, it took us a long time to get her puberty blocker, authorized and paid for by insurance. But I knew that in the end, if insurance didn't pay for it, I could pay for it. I could afford her therapist who didn't take our insurance. So, and then, I had this community around me, a huge community in Los Angeles. And I had the best center for trans care 7 miles from my home.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
There's so many barriers for appropriate access, for kids. I mean, there's people who live several hours away or multiple states away from somebody who's providing, gender affirming care. It's funny, I just read an article that was talking about how we're making great strides with trans care in white affluent families, but that in lower socioeconomic, groups and, some racial groups that we've hardly made any strides in their access to care. So I personally do believe that we know that family support makes a massive difference, right? So we know that kids who are supported by their families have much lower suicide risk, the same as like cisgender teens, and what a big difference that makes. So I really think so family support, for there to be family support, there needs to be family, acceptance. And I think in a lot of sort of minority groups, this is still, not accepted, as much, right? And so I think like visibility, particularly people of color being visible, and, showing that, our kids and teens and young adults can be thriving and successful and lead full lives, and just showing acceptance really then goes a long way for these, minority communities to start accepting their kids. And, with acceptance goes getting them to the appropriate, provider. And so, I mean, there's so much that can be done, but I really, really think visibility helps a lot. And particularly, so when and it's great when we have, various, celebrities, who come out, but even greater when we see, like someone of color, who's supporting their kid, because I think that really helps a lot. And then also really great when we're seeing, somebody in Congress who's trans, and, because, we don't want to just because just seeing celebrities be successful is not what, is not an experience that's applicable to, most, people. So we want to see, trans adults who are professors and who are out, and, who are physicians, who are teachers, who are librarians, who are in politics, in all fields, out and visible and leading successful lives. And having children and having families. And, I think really, seeing more and more positive examples then makes, people more accepting. And when people are more accepting, then we provide, then they get care. And then we just need to improve access to care. We need more gender affirming providers. We need more, one thing that's great is, like Planned Parenthood starting to provide gender affirming care for 16, and above. So, having it be affordable and accessible to everybody. And then the mental health is a whole other, issue, but affordable mental health care is huge as well. So
absolutely. It's so sad to me that therapy is really relegated to the realm of the elite, and so frustrating. I love all of your suggestions, and especially that so much of it is what's happening in the home, and the sense of acceptance and feeling safe and seen and secure and soothed with the people that you live with is one of the ways that we can help them get to the next step, right? Which is like, soon you'll be out of school. Soon you'll be thinking about what you want to do. Soon, and like, we're going to keep scaffolding your self-esteem until you get to the place where, you have a bit more agency about making choices about maybe where you live. And if you want to co-locate a little closer to services, or if you, those kinds of things that I just think so much about the small town that I grew up in. And now I go back through my mind and be like, oh, that person, like I see they were masking now, or what have you, they were under the radar, because what other options did they have? So, I really appreciate your suggestions. So I'm looking forward to your answer to the final question now that I know that you had a breakdown and ended up in therapy, just like all of us. Yeah. This is so great. She's not just Wonder Woman. She actually,
yes, she broke down.
It's like, it's so humanizing. I mean, I say that because when people say they don't have a therapist, which I understand for economic reasons for sure, but when they don't have one and they could, I'm always like, wow. So how does that work? How do you live? Without a therapist? I don't understand. So the last question on the podcast is, and I think for you, I'd put a bit of a lens on it. So when you consider the intolerance and the challenges in the world, how do you cope with grief and rage?
Yeah, I think it's so hard not to get discouraged by, what you see in the media trying to, take away, rights from trans people, what's, going on in politics. And so I try to sort of balance the feed I get with positive feed, as well. And, look at people who are, thriving and succeeding. I try to make a difference in whatever way, that I can. I just really have decided that I can't dwell on negativity like that. And, I have to be, positive, and I don't want, being trans, is always going to be difficult. It's always going to be harder, and different than a cisgender experience. And obviously I'm not trans, so I can never know, what it's really like. But, and part of me also thinks that, when I see that there's sort of backlash, it's because progress is happening that we're having backlash. So it's not always negative, the backlash. If we weren't making so much progress and fighting for rights and being so visible and having people, be in Congress who are trans, and, doing TV shows who are trans, and, writing books, and, doing all these great things, there wouldn't be all this backlash. So I also think about that part of the backlash is because every time there's progress, there's backlash, and then we make more progress, and then there'll be more backlash. Mm-hmm. So if there was no backlash, it would mean that we weren't doing what we're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
It makes so much sense. Yeah. And thank you so much for putting your work into the world and adding your voice to this cause, because your book made so much sense. It was very reassuring, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk more about it. Thanks so much, Paria.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
What a privilege to speak with and learn from Paria today. Since writing her book, Paria has since started the Pediatric and Adolescent Gender Wellness Clinic at Cedars Sinai. In the show notes for today's episode, you'll find links to Paria's social media, website, where to buy her book, and also contact information at Cedars Sinai. Find the show notes at numinouspodcast.com. For longtime listeners, you'll know that this is my listener shout-out section. I would like to thank the 3 listeners in Izmir, Turkey. I assume you're all friends or family, and if you're not, one of you should organize a meetup, because in the entire country, what are the chances that my 3 listeners all come from Izmir? I also want you to know I went on forvo.com to hear how Turkish people say Izmir, and I hope I'm doing it justice. Folks, if you don't know about Forvo, you oughta. This is not a paid advertisement, though I think maybe they should pay me. This is just me offering a life hack. Forvo.com is where you can go to hear native speakers pronouncing words. So if there's a word in a language that's foreign to you and you want to hear how to pronounce it correctly, you go to forvo.com, Forvo.com, and maybe some generous soul out there has recorded themselves saying it. That's where I go to check my Scottish Gaelic when I'm not sure. Forvo.com. There was 3 or 4 people who had all pronounced Izmir, and that was super helpful. So thank you. Thank you for listening. I think it's very, very cool. It's very cool. Super appreciate you spending time with me. If you'd like to stay connected, you can follow me on Instagram at Carmen Spanyola. Or you could go to my website and find out how you can access nearly all of my current offerings for one low monthly membership in the Numinous Network. All my courses and about 15 to 20 live calls a month. All my workshops. Just sign up for even just a month and give it a try. All one low price. You'll find all the details at carmenspanyola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.